Support for Amplified Voices comes from the Restorative Action Foundation. Learn more at restorativeactionalliance.org.
Everyone has a voice, a story to tell. Some are marginalized and muted. What if there were a way to amplify those stories? To have conversations with real people in real communities? A way to help them step into the power of their lived experience. Welcome to Amplified Voices, a podcast lifting the experiences of people and families impacted by the criminal legal system. Together, we can create positive change for everyone.
Hello, and welcome to a special episode of Amplified Voices. I am your host, Jason, with my co-host, Amber. Hi, Amber.
Hi, Jason.
So today we're here to do our season 2 wrap up, and what a season, right?
It's been a really great season, and it's so hard to believe that we're at the end of season 2 and gearing up for season 3.
There's so many unexpected things that happened during the course of the year, even outside of the podcast, that just made this an interesting year, right?
Yeah, that's for certain. I mean, who knew that when we went into a pandemic at the beginning of 2020, that we would still be in this pandemic all this time later?
Yeah, definitely has impacted our lives, but also forced us to look at personal decisions in our lives and see where we're going and what we're doing. So as it has with so many people and even our guests.
100%. Yes.
So you want to talk about what we were able to accomplish and the people that we talked with?
Yeah, absolutely. Those who have been following along know that we covered a lot of different topics and we talked to a lot of different people. We started off the season really strong with Stephanie and her dual story of being a lawyer, being a public defender, and struggling with her own feelings about her own victimization, and then really coming into her own as she met more people in her work and realized things are not really as they seem. She started out like, oh, I want to be a prosecutor. I'm going to get all the insider secrets to use against the other side. And then she really learned a lot during that process.
Stephanie's incredible. I mean, we've kept in touch with her as we have with so many guests and follow their stories and their successes. And I just expect great things from her and her career.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's amazing that she's come to a point early on in her career where she's really in it for the right reasons and trying to help so many people.
I agree 100%.
And then we talked to Richard. When we talked with him, he was getting ready to launch Commissary Club. And they have something called The Yard, and they are talking with people every Thursday night. It's really taken off and helping a lot of people in terms of what he's doing.
Yeah, I really appreciated his authenticity and frankness about the things that he went through and really focusing on that employment piece of it, because it is something that a lot of people struggle with. And then kind of flipping the script or flipping the narrative, like, this affects a lot of people. This is not the other. This is all of us. And if you can harness the community of people who have had these experiences, you can really make a lot of changes. So that was a great conversation, and he's doing some great work.
So we talked to a couple people where disabilities played a role in terms of their conviction, how they were treated in the legal system. And we talked with both Nick Dubin and Carol Nasnikas.
Carol is just a wonderful person, and her family went through a horrendous situation where her son, who has developmental disabilities, got caught up in the legal system, and the whole idea of him not really understanding what he had done and then being held criminally liable for it just seems very terrifying. And she really illustrated how it affected not just her son, but the entire family. It changed their retirement plans, where they could live. And while he did not spend time incarcerated, he did end up having to be on a public registry, which changed their entire lives. So that was really eye-opening in terms of, again, how our system really doesn't take those nuances of somebody's capability to understand into play.
Right. And, in that case, the parents didn't realize there was anything they'd have to look out for. It just shows vulnerability all the way around.
That really correlates with Nick's book, because Nick really wrote the book about his own experiences to help families that have individuals on the spectrum or with developmental disabilities to know what to look for and how to work with their children to understand what to look out for. Because like you said, Carol and her family didn't even know what to look out for. They didn't see their child as someone who was a sexual being.
I've actually had an opportunity to read the book, which I recommend now to everybody, not just for people who are already in the system, but for people who want to understand more. I don't think there's anybody out there who doesn't know somebody with developmental disabilities or autism. It was such an honor to talk to both of them. They're such decent people, and it's just a shame that they've had to go through all that.
100%. And I'm glad that they're both out there doing the work to share their stories to help other people. Carol with Elrid and Nick with the book. And actually, Nick being on the board of Elrid, which is amazing.
It is something to go through what they've gone through and then find a way to try to make things better for other people. It just speaks to their character as well.
Absolutely.
And then we talked with Juanita. And what's interesting to me is she talked about her friend Sincere, who's been incarcerated for so long, and she's advocating with her group of women that are trying to get some individuals out who have just been incarcerated for way, way too long. And what she said to us since is that this was the first time that she publicly shared Sincere's story in that type of a forum. And now I see her doing it all the time.
Yeah, she is really everywhere. And the Sisters in Prison Reform, which is her organization, is doing some great, great work really around that idea that people are able to change. And when we're looking at these lengthy sentences and the lack of even an opportunity for parole in the state where she is, that we're doing a lot of harm and we're keeping a lot of good out of society that these folks are able to do if they were just given a chance. So amazing work. And we definitely want to shout out to her and her colleagues. They're doing a lot of great work. And with Justice Forward Virginia, a lot of work there as well.
Now would be probably a good time to talk about the speed bump during the middle of our season.
Yeah.
We recorded one episode, we had it out very briefly, and then some new information came to light, and we took it down because we don't want to cause additional harm. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, we talked a little bit in our last wrap up for last season, kind of how we select guests for the podcast. And one thing that has always been very, very important to us when we have these conversations is harm reduction and authenticity. So in this case, we had a guest recommended. We did have a previous conversation and we brought this guest on. And unfortunately, the person was just not exactly forthcoming and a little bit misleading. And so we really had to grapple with, could this do harm? So we made the very difficult decision after further conversations with the individual, giving them an opportunity to respond. And we had to make the decision that it was not good to go forward with that episode.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we really advocate for is that people are human beings, can make mistakes, can recover from even doing horrific things and move forward in their lives. But we don't want to promote harm. We advocate for growth, for redemption, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key here is understanding that redemption is possible and that if you are still in a place where you're not able to acknowledge harm and you're still continuing the behavior, then this is not something that we're here to support.
Right.
Because we are here, again, to create wholeness for everyone and give people a platform to really talk about how their lives have changed. That was something that was a growth process for us and for our podcast. And it's a commitment to our listeners that we will never be in a situation where we would promote harm.
And somebody who we had on who has caused harm in the past that freely admits it and is now living a very, very honorable life would be Anderson from the ACLU.
Yeah, I found the discussion with Anderson to be so inspiring because he is all about living in your power and utilizing opportunities and doing the hard work, right? So some of the things that he talked about in terms of his journey and getting into the work was like, I took, a train and a bus in order to do the work, and it was an all-day evolution, but I knew that's what I had to do because I cared so much about what I was doing. So I really found that episode super uplifting, and it had a lot of great feedback from listeners in how uplifted they were by Anderson and his story and his work.
He's just a phenomenal person. And watching him on social media, he's constantly at the Capitol. He was pushing in Connecticut for clean slate legislation and just was there every single morning. You'd always see him with Gus.
Yeah.
And the two of them were inseparable, like constantly at the Capitol, outside. Didn't matter what the weather was, whether it was pouring or it was hot or it was cold. They were outside greeting representatives and senators, catching them for a couple minutes, taking pictures with them, expressing their views, and then testifying at hearings at the appropriate time. So Anderson's really making a difference.
The real key to that is the people who have the lived experience and how they support the growth and development and opportunity to empower people to be part of the change.
Staying on the Connecticut theme, we talked with Kathy Flaherty.
Yeah, just really dynamic. And Kathy is a very authentic person. She's going to go against the grain if she has to, even in circles that it's not very popular. And I loved the overlap because she is not a criminal justice attorney, but I loved when she really helped us understand the overlap between mental health and the criminal legal system, utilizing her story to do that. So I really appreciated and learned a lot.
I mean, we learn from Kathy all the time. And Kathy's an advocate every single day. So that was wonderful.
And then Morgan. So we had Morgan Godwin on talking about the intersection between addiction, criminal justice, and how those laws really are causing great harm to us as a society. The idea that an individual would be caught in addiction, share something with a friend, and then be charged with murder for that person's death. She really brought home how it's not big drug dealers or cartels and this and that are getting caught up in that. It's friends who are trying to keep their friend, loved one, whoever it is, well by saying, I know you're not well because you have this addiction and I don't want you to be sick. So this is how I can help you.
Right.
And sometimes bad things happen in those situations. And rather than offering help, our system is causing more harm. One other thing that I wanted to mention, she's very clear about the things that she saw and some of the privilege that she was afforded and how that affected her experience. So I appreciate that acknowledgement and that hard conversation that she puts out there.
She continues to tell her story, to advocate, to put it out there. She graduated from college this year, right? So
yeah.
All those good things are happening, and it's great to have had her as a guest to highlight that for people. And as with all the others, I wish her continued success and going to be watching her career to see how that takes off. So what do you want to talk about? Mark?
So, Mark particularly hit me because this episode was really focusing around the idea of the criminal legal system and individuals who have Alzheimer's and dementia and those people who serve as caregivers for them. And a lot of people, unless they experience Alzheimer's dementia in their family or in their workplace or encounter individuals, which most of us have, never even think in their mind that somebody who's affected by that would also find themselves caught up in the legal system, because you're like, how can you hold somebody accountable who doesn't really understand. So that particular episode was really informative and a little difficult for me because in my professional life, I saw people who were affected by this and I could never imagine them sitting in a jail cell.
Right. It's a reminder that anybody can get caught up in the net, this wide net that we're casting on sex crimes. The father didn't even realize what he had done. And not only did it impact Mark's father, you could tell the harm that it's done to his whole family and the fact that he was asked not to volunteer at a particular organization anymore. So all those collateral consequences, it was just tragic.
Yeah. And that really is a great word for it. We have a very hard time with our current system and our culture of punitiveness in differentiating between a horrible tragedy and a crime.
Yeah. So we have a few more people that we haven't touched on yet. So we have Marty, who I'd say was probably our most fun guest.
Yeah, I would say Marty has a little bit of, comedy, some heavy material, and is really, really passionate about everything that he does. So it was really a good conversation with him dealing with his entire journey and the level of deep passion around the accountability that he felt for what he got caught up in, combined with the idea that nobody is the worst thing that they ever did.
Right.
And his passion for advocating for people who are on that path to rehabilitation was really, really touching.
Yeah. And Marty's really open about the fact that he's gay and how that has impacted his growth and development and some assaults that happened to him personally. As I said, he's entertaining when he tells it, but he went through a lot of pain along the way to come out on the other side. He's trying to use that now for good to help other people. He's written his own book that's been published and is now out and available.
Yeah. Again, I think that it's definitely a situation where learning, growth, understanding, and working through past trauma really turned out in a way that is doing a lot of good for people.
Yeah. And then I think the only ones we didn't really touch on so far have been Tracy Bernardi and Barbara Fair, which those are incredible episodes where a big component of that was talking about solitary confinement at a time that we were trying to pass the PROTECT Act, which would limit the use of solitary confinement.
Right. We actually ended up with several episodes with Barbara because it was an important moment and really trying to move things forward, move people to action. It's still ongoing. Even though those episodes really had that common thread about solitary confinement, it really also has to do with this idea of accountability within the system in terms of departments of correction policing themselves. And that oversight that is so sorely needed, not necessarily because somebody's a bad person or people are evil or whatever, but anytime you have a closed system with no transparency, that is where there is a lot of opportunity for bad things to happen. So that's really like the central tenet of the PROTECT Act. And Barbara has just been out there front and center for so many years, really pushing and pushing. And I know that that fight is not over because unfortunately, what happened in the process was that the act passed both houses of the legislature, and the governor, upon high pressure from corrections unions and so on and so forth, felt the need to veto the bill and issue an executive order that could be repealed anytime. It's my understanding that what we're hearing from inside, and Barbara has spoken about it recently and written about it, is that there's a certain level of pushback inside, like, oh, you tried to do this, and so people are being treated in a way that is retaliatory. And because there isn't that oversight, there's no way for somebody to stop that from happening.
Yeah, what Barbara just said on a recent meeting is that it's gotten worse for people who are incarcerated, which is a shame because, as you know, this had a tremendous amount of support from religious community. It had support from the legal community. It had support up and down. And the governor had promised to sign it.
Right.
And then he vetoed it. So, no one's giving up. They're coming back to address it. And I like to think that we help do our part and we'll continue to do our part to raise awareness and bring the issues forward. So it was really timely. It was great to have Barbara on as a guest. It was great to have Tracy on as a guest. I mean, she spent so many years in solitary confinement. There was so much more to her story. If we go back and listen to that and hear about what it was like to even ride the bus in those cages where she's locked up and they say, if anything ever happened to this bus, we're not coming back for you.
Right.
What she's been through and who she is. It's just amazing how she's been able to come so far and do so well.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that really is inspiring is the passion that she brings and the work that she's done. And I remember you asking her, is it difficult to continue to share your story? And her response to that was yes. But if we don't bear witness, nothing's ever going to change. So that is really the spirit of the Amplified Voices podcast, because there are so many people that have a perception because it's been glossed over by the media, it's been glossed over or presented in a completely different way in the public eye, or people just don't have the proximity to individuals who've been impacted to really know what's going on. I know I certainly didn't. This has been a growth process for me, for sure.
Right. This was an interesting year. Originally, we were aggressive. We were going to try to go for an every other week, but we want to put out a high quality podcast. We do this in our spare time.
Yep.
So we're going to move towards a monthly schedule and tell people this is the date we're going to record. This is the date we should expect to have it published. Hopefully, we'll be able to stick with it. And that's what's coming up. But even over the course of the past year, we've both had some changes to our own lives. You want to share some of your news?
Yeah, so I actually made a career change, moving out of public relations and marketing for the healthcare industry and moving into a social justice organization full time. So I'm very excited about the work. I really have gone back to the fundraising area that I have been in my entire career before my world was kind of upended. I'm very excited about what the future holds.
Yeah, I think it's a great move for you, and I'm excited for you. You're doing something you're really passionate about with people who are going to value you and people who are going to be great to work with. So awesome news.
And so tell us a little bit about your year.
So the big change for me happened actually close to the beginning of the year when I received a pardon. So my record is completely clear. And it's taken me a while to actually get used to.
Yeah. And that was somewhat of a process.
Definitely a process. It was the second time I put in an application. And I learned from the first time, I think that some of the emphasis that the state was going through on clean slate probably helped a little bit. I believe that they actually took a look at my application this time and had some of the reference letters that I was able to put together and the path that I've been on, the journey. So it's nice. But, unfortunately, as we've talked about, collateral consequences continue. They're not completely gone. But overall, good news. So, yeah, a lot of good things are going on. We talked a little bit about what we have planned for next season. I think some of it we're going to see as things go on, who we want to bring on. But there's been a lot of discussion about juveniles in the criminal legal system.
Right.
And so we're looking to bring on somebody who may have committed an offense when they were younger. We're going to talk to some more survivors of crime. We actually have someone lined up who was exonerated later.
Yep. We like to look at all of the different aspects because it is so all-encompassing for someone who has been impacted by the legal system. So looking at things from the perspective of someone who may have had a parent incarcerated or someone who was able to really succeed after a period of incarceration, or someone who had multiple struggles, someone who was affected by crime. So all of those things are how we're looking at things as a whole. And there's so much ground to cover and so many different people who come from different backgrounds who've been affected. At the end of the day, it's about giving that platform and providing that access for people who may not know what's kind of going on behind the curtain, if you will.
Right. And we've had positive movements in legislation. We had clean slate pass in Connecticut. and in other places. And so there's this feeling of pushback that certain politicians want to say, hey, they've gone too far. We have to bring it back. So what we want to do is make sure that we're providing real stories, real people.
Exactly. Everything from the veto of the PROTECT Act to pushback against police accountability to signing the clean slate bill and then saying, well, maybe we need to revisit. We don't want to leave those revisiting doors open.
Right.
So providing that basis and that platform for people with lived experience to step into their power is what we're here for.
Right. And then things get watered down and things have carve outs where they say, well, we're going to exclude a certain subset of the population.
Right.
Or at the national level, a number of people were sent home from prison on the CARES Act. And now there's the threat of sending them back. So there's a big campaign, keep them home.
Yep.
But we need for the president to say, yeah, we're going to not put those people back in prison. They've been living at home. They've been contributing to their society and their community. So they're going to stay home now.
Right. And then a lot of really great work done around parole and probation reform and things kind of gearing up for that. One of the successes that we didn't mention was Connecticut being the first state in the country to make phone calls free.
Oh, yeah.
That was a large victory with so many individuals, groups involved in making that happen. So really serving kind of as a model for the rest of the country. But looking at that as a whole, Worth Rises is doing really, really great work around the country in different areas about all aspects of that idea of entities making money off of the carceral system. And they have a great curriculum that you can go on and look at. So I encourage people to do that.
So I'm really excited to wrap up season 2 and get started with season 3. And I hope everybody has a happy holiday and a happy new year. And let's make some positive change together.
100%. Really excited for season 3. We appreciate all of our listeners. If you love the podcast, go ahead and make a financial contribution if you're able. That does allow us to maintain production. So we appreciate any way that you're able to amplify, support financially, or just listen and share.
Fantastic. Until next time, Amber.
We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Amplified Voices, a podcast lifting the experiences of people and families impacted by the criminal legal system. For more information, episodes, and podcast notes, visit amplifiedvoices.show.